Hello and welcome to this presentation called Are You Being Served? Rather a facetious title named after a 1970s British sitcom. Nothing at all to do with the characters or anything in the show, but still there is an element of this going through my presentation today. So we're starting off with a quote from Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay. I am the greatest thing that ever lived. Quote from me a few weeks ago. You're lucky to have me, says I rather facetiously. I was joking. So the reading that I'm thinking about is Mark 9:30 to 37, and the text will be in the description for you to have a look at. There are three elements in it. Now, Mark was, I think, the first person to produce, or the first person to have a gospel named after him, very shortly after Jesus left this planet. And it was written kind of with a couple of things in mind. Firstly, you know, people didn't buy books in those days. You didn't download them on your Kindles or nip to Waterstones to get the latest bestseller. You know, hardly anyone could read or write. So, you know, a book was rarer than hen's teeth. And very, very important because, you know, Mark was very concerned that it shouldn't be forgotten. He was also concerned that there wouldn't necessarily be very long to tell people all about, you know, what he witnessed in the life of Jesus Christ, because, you know, in terms of, you know, the end of the world, what we call eschatological sort of issues, i.e. he thought it was going to happen like tomorrow, as it were, and so therefore let's quickly get it down. And so whereas a later gospel like Matthew or Luke would sort of spend, you know, quite a long time recounting an episode, Mark would try and get it down in a few sentences. So what we've got in today's reading, in, you know, from 30 to 37, in just 7 short verses, we've got 3 disparate or seemingly disparate things, but they're not really all that different from one another. There is a link tying them together, and there's a slight sort of slant on it that is quite often missed. And it's that I want to try and sort of identify in today's presentation. So they're starting out with Jesus predicting his death there. Okay, that's not the first time he's done it in that gospel. And the disciples squabbling about who'll be the greatest, and then the child bit, whoever receives a child in my name. So, to start with, think about some words that are connected with how you feel when you feel safe. Got some? Pause the video if you have to. Now, invert all those ideas, turn them upside down, the exact opposite. Because that is how I would imagine Jesus feeling right at the beginning of this episode. He's predicting his own death. Okay, this time, the second time round, it's a much starker prediction. Okay, earlier in the Gospel, in Mark 8, he began to teach them that it was necessary that the Son of Man should suffer many things and should be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and rise again after 3 days. He kept telling them this plainly. Well, it's, you know, that is sort of bad enough, as it were. But in Mark 9, he's now using direct speech, whereas before it was he began to teach them that and it's reported speech. He's using direct speech. Okay, the Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men. Okay, and it's actually reporting Jesus' words. Okay, it is now happening. The Son of Man is now being delivered. Okay, it wasn't like it was necessary to, which kind of like sort of puts it into the fluffy distance somewhere. Now it's happening. How does Jesus refer to himself? It's very important because he doesn't say I will be delivered. He says the Son of Man will be. Okay, this is God Okay, and that kind of makes this message even worse, because it's like the lead singer being kicked out of their own band. You know, this is the creator that is being put to death by the things that he created, or by the people, you know, the humanity that he created. Okay, so it's a very, very stark message that we have here. Okay, and what is the disciples' immediate intellectual response? I don't believe it. You know, it was almost sort of not disbelief in the sense of lack of faith, I suppose, but just the way that any of us would take, you know, such sort of news of terrible magnitude that you could almost sort of shuffle it to one side, and you just can't bear to think about it. We've all had those sorts of experiences in our time, and you know that you would do anything, you know, watch a sitcom on the telly or something like that to try and just put this to the back of your mind and try and pretend it's not happening. Okay, so you have got you know, that one side to what's happening, but you've also got something else. Now let's just have a little think about, these are my doggies here. Well, they're long gone now, I'm afraid. They died a few years ago, bless them. Dino is the black dog on the right, the Dobie Collie Cross. Toffee is the nice fluffy one, a gorgeous little doggy, and Fudge is the darker brown dog. Okay, now Toffee was sort of the bottom of the pack, and Dino on the right was the pack leader. Now, they're kind of like related to wolves. Now, the pack leader is the only dog in the whole thing that is allowed to hunt. And because of that, the pack leader is allowed to come and go away from the pack at any time. Okay? When the pack leader leaves, the rest of the pack sort of have to decide, you know, who will lead us now. And it was quite funny in our house, if Dino was sat on a chair, on a nice comfy chair, then he'd decide to go off and maybe have a little drink of water or a sniff around or something. And Fudge would then jump onto the chair vacated by Dino. If Fudge decided that then he wanted to go off and have a little snifter around, then Toffee would be allowed onto that seat. And it was literally as clear cut as that. And if one of them came back and a lower member of the pack was on the comfy seat, then they would have to get off so that the other one could then sort of have it back again. And it was quite sort of, you know, it was quite funny to watch, but it's also, you know, this is how they behave in the wild. Okay, and it's quite telling, really, when it comes to our disciples, because who will lead us now? This is the next debate that is going on. Who will be the greatest once Jesus has gone? So let's have a look and re-examine our story so far. Okay, Jesus predicting his death. This is the alpha male, say in dog parlance, you know, leaving the pack, okay? And the disciples then resort to subhuman levels to decide who is going to be the greatest. They are, and I'm using the word subhuman. It's a very stark word. It doesn't sound very nice. It's very judgmental and whatever, but it is going to the level of animals in terms of, you know, their reaction to it, okay? It's very, very blunt, very coarse. It must have been very hurtful to Jesus, okay? So what does Jesus do, okay? Well, given that Mark wrote his Gospels in such a sort of hurry, okay, and we've got, you know, great long sentences here, separated by commas and colons and things, because there wasn't even time to sort of think and stop and end our sentences. It was and this, and that, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. Not even any decent connectives, okay? So we have a pivotal point in this passage, given that we weren't told every time that Jesus made a cup of tea or had a drink of water, you know, but we are told something very seemingly inconsequential. He sat down, okay? He sat down, you know. It's hardly sort of you know, earth-shattering, is it? Except that it is, okay? Because what he did not do in response, he didn't cower. He didn't just leave them to get on with it and just sort of, not tackle the problem. He did not predict hell and brimstone for those disciples. Yet, later on in this self-same sort of chapter of Mark, we have the disciples wanting Jesus to, almost predict hell and brimstone for, people that were casting out demons that didn't belong to, their band of merry men, as it were. Okay? And, Jesus said, don't be so silly, I think, basically. So he's not predicting hell and brimstone. Okay? He's not throwing his toys out of the pram and having a tantrum in the way that perhaps, the previous conceptions of God from the Old Testament where, they do something wrong and, this means that something dreadful is going to happen. This is not happening here. All that's happening is Jesus is sitting down, because as sitting down is sort of reinforcing the relationships that have actually gone astray. Okay? A Jewish teacher, a rabbi, taught the masses from a seated position. So he sits down, he reasserts his authority. Okay? He's saying, look, I am really in charge here. Okay? This is about forgotten relationships. Human beings on a very deep level are like, the doggies without the pack leader. They have to somehow or other nestle and jostle to see who's in charge and try and manipulate situations. Okay? Even, to the extent of ruining the planet. And, it's just purely human beings trying to assume the role of God in all sorts of situations, okay? And it's in the media, the judgmental often positions that they take, the tabloid press, for example, it's just putting itself in the place of judge and accuser, okay? And Jesus is saying, look, who's really in charge here? Okay, he's sitting down, he's asserting his authority again, and the disciples then say, because they now realise that the game's up, that they've been caught, okay? And rather than, some terrible thing that's going to happen, and Jesus must have been very hurt by this situation because he's going through an awful time, and all he's doing is sitting down and teaching them the reality of the situation, okay? Now, the reality of the situation really is, if you want to be first, you've got to be. Now, you could say, yeah, if you want to be first, you've got to put yourself last. Okay, and we all know, what that kind of means. Okay, you can hear me now flicking through my study Bible here, trying to find the actual bit here. Yeah, okay. If anyone wishes to be first, he must be the last of all and the servant of all. Okay, now that is kind of a huge challenge, because this is not the servant of just our nice merry band of disciples. Put it in today's parlance, it's not just the servant of all Christians. Okay, it's not just the servant of the state and the politicians and all the people that like to think they're very important. It's the servant of all of those people that perhaps we think we don't like, the people whose religious groups we don't think we get on with, the people who are living out on the street, and it's very hard to be that. And because we are not perfect, then it is an almost godly role to take on. So really, in effect, Jesus is saying, if you want to be powerful, you've got to be humble, but you've also got to be me. You've got to be, you've got to be as me, okay? As it says elsewhere in one of the Gospels, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, okay? And as we know, and as, we have a cross and a resurrection, which tells us that we are not perfect, okay? But Jesus is saying, if you want to be the greatest, you've got to be me, and it's therefore impossible, okay? We'll come back to that, it's impossible in a minute, okay? I'm very, very fond of the Hindu tradition, and a presentation wouldn't be a presentation without a brief reference to that. Okay, there is no power in the cosmos that does not emanate from me and belong to me. The entire universe is suspended from me as if I were the string and necklace of jewels. You cannot get your power from each other. You can, you know, jostle and argue till you're blue in the face about who is going to be the leader and who is going to be the greatest. But you can't be. You have to understand that there is no power that comes unless it comes from me, from God. Okay? The second teaching kind of follows on from there, but addresses this relationship problem. Okay? Receive the children. Now, the crux, I believe, of Jesus' teaching about this sort of kind of hinges on the central trait of the character of children. Okay? And so, just have a think for a second, an honest think. What are children really like? Okay? We can have all the nice cushy words. Yes, we love them. They're gorgeous. They're very, you know, they're very eager to learn. They're keen. They're forgiving. And, you know, they're very trusting and believing and all that sort of thing. Okay? They're also not perfect. Okay? They can drive you nuts, so says from someone who teaches them. Okay? You can't help, but you know, in our dealings with our children, we never sort of, you know, if they're naughty or whatever else like that, you know, you only ever want to teach them something that's good and that's better. Okay, we also fail those children, and it's probably at the times when we fail those children, and some children have failed very, very, you know, very badly. And you know, you don't really have to look further than, you know, sometimes what you see on the news to see how they're failed. You know, we've just witnessed in France or in the Alps, you know, a child, a 7-year-old child that was, you know, sort of shot with a bullet, you know, and her family shot, and a 4-year-old that's, you know, so scared that they're cowering under their dead mother. I mean, how else can you talk about failing children? Okay, but in all sorts of situations, we fail them in ways big and small. Okay, and it's real world children. It isn't kitsch children. You know, they weren't better at looking after their children in those days. You know, there are tales of Roman governors and what have you saying, if it's a male child to their wife, then, you know, look after it. If it's a female, throw it out on the streets to forage and starve. Okay, so you know, I'm not deceiving anybody here. Okay, what are children like? Okay, receive them, because no matter how much we fail them, this is the central bit. Our Father who art in heaven. Okay, when Jesus was teaching the Lord's Prayer, he wasn't just teaching a willy-nilly thing just to learn the words to. He was teaching them. He was giving them a poisoned dart. Okay, so when he's saying receive children, it's because God is our Father. We are all children in His sight. Okay, and we are being told to address Him as a Father. Okay. And however severed the relationships that we have with our children, for whatever reason, okay, there is still the need, this deep ingrained need for earthly parents. Okay, even if children have never known who their birth parents are, there is still this, you know, and it's been proven time and time again, you know, the adoption procedure has even been changed, you know, from like having no contact at all with parents to trying to encourage parental contact and seeing it as a positive thing, even if children have new families, because of this deep ingrained need. Okay? And Jesus is saying at this point, when they've been arguing about who's the greatest, you cannot be the greatest. You have got to remember this relationship where you deeply need me. Okay? This parent and child relationship is absolutely paramount. It's why the prodigal son was told between a father and a son, and not between an employer and an employee, or, you know, a friend and a best mate. Okay? It is actually a father and a son, because it is that relationship that is paramount. It is that relationship which is severed because of sin. Okay? Yes, when I'm gone, you will be equipped. Okay, but it will come from God. Okay, there is no need to worry about who will be the greatest, because I will still be providing. You have got to remember this absolutely vital and paramount relationship between the child, as it were, that is you. You know, you may be 50 or 60 years old, but in God's eyes you are still a child. Okay, and remembering this deep bond that exists between a child and its parent that cannot be broken, regardless of whatever circumstances go on in their lives. Okay, I mentioned the Lord's Prayer earlier. Okay, I've kind of condensed all of what I've said into look to me for your power and for your spiritual food. Okay, that's what those sort of 7 or 8 verses were saying. Okay, Simone Weil, she's quite a complicated theologian. She was born to atheistic Jews, although her theology was kind of based on Christianity. She never actually became a Catholic, but you know, this is where, you know, she was coming from, you know, when she was talking about theology. Okay, she wrote an essay called Concerning the Our Father, or the Lord's Prayer, and it's in a book called Waiting on God, first published in 1950. Extremely relevant now. Okay, as always was. Okay, and you might kind of like get some insights into what I've been saying from these quotes. So, from the line, Our Father who art in heaven, which I mentioned earlier, He is our Father. There is nothing real in us which does not come from Him. We belong to Him. He loves us since He loves Himself, and we are His. Nevertheless, He is our Father who is in heaven, not elsewhere. If we think to have a Father here below, it is not He, it is a false God. That's just like this squabble for greatness. You will never put anyone in the place of Jesus Christ, just because Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, God. Okay? We cannot take a single step towards Him. We do not walk vertically. Okay? So this is kind of like using an imagery of a God up there, which, yeah, it's been challenged by people like John Robinson. But it is saying, you know, that even metaphorically, we can't sort of, you know, take steps upwards towards heaven. We can't do it. All we can do is turn our eyes towards Him. We do not have to search for Him. We only have to change the direction in which we are looking, altering our consciousness. It is for Him to search for us. We must be happy in the knowledge that He is infinitely beyond our reach. Thus we can be certain that the evil in us, even if it overwhelms our whole being, in no way sullies the divine purity, bliss and perfection. In other words, we cannot taint God with our ways, but we know that God is searching for us. And therefore, you know, it's kind of, you know, this idea of the fact that there is absolutely nothing that you cannot take to God. Okay? Give us this day our daily bread. Okay? So it's not merely the earthly things that we need for this day, just like, you know, the disciples squabbling for earthly greatness. Okay? Or even earthly food, clothing and so on. That's not what we're asking for. We're asking for spiritual food. There's a transcendent energy whose source is in heaven, and this flows into us as soon as we wish for it. It's a real energy. It performs actions through the agency of our souls and our bodies. We should ask for this food. At the moment of asking, and by the very fact that we ask for it, we know that God will give it to us. We ought not to be able to bear to go without it for a single day. For when our actions only depend on earthly energy subject to the necessity of this world, we are incapable of thinking and doing anything but evil. While the disciples wanted earthly power, the only thing that could happen is earthly rubbish that we live with from day to day. Okay? And that is really all I've got to say, really. Okay, that those things were about trying to restore the relationship between, God and human beings, as a child being dependent on a father, and understanding that there is no way that anyone could ever be greatest without looking to Jesus Christ for that greatness and that power. And so here endeth, except to say that, to be fair on Muhammad Ali, who reverted to Islam in his sort of early life, but he did say, God is the greatest, I'm just the greatest boxer. Okay, so even he was just being facetious, and he really understood where his power was coming from. He was also a great peacemaker. And on September the 21st, just so that people are aware, September the 21st every year is the UN Global Truce Day. It's called Peace One Day, and supposedly all countries are supposed to put down their weapons. And in the past, it's led to such things as in Afghanistan, a truce and getting loads of kids to have vaccinations, and how about receiving kids in his name. Well, a fantastic thing to be doing, regardless of your religion. Okay, receiving children in God's name. If you're a Muslim or a Hindu or a Jew or whatever, as long as your heart is sincere and you're looking to God for your sort of transcendental food every single day, then I'm sure that it'll happen. Okay. All right, I will leave you there. Bye.